Welcome to Saga Thursday, friends. I am Raj, your guide on this weekly Saga journey. Today we're digging into the Franks battle board with the help of Stephen Holdeman III. Now, if you're not familiar with the Franks, you want to go back and take a look at last week's video, which provided an overview, as well as a discussion of their various sub-factions. Today we're going to be drilling down into the battle board itself. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dig into that battle board then, if that sounds good to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Looking at it, we have a lot of things going on, and just a quick summary, and then we'll try to hit maybe everyone real quickly, each move, and we can talk about their applications.
Yeah.
The major mechanic, as everyone points out, is the battle pool and the combat pool are suddenly very weird things that have been added in there. And what is the battle pool?
Battle pool. All Saga dice placed on this ability must have different symbols. When an ability of this battle board refers to X, it is the number of Saga dice on this ability box.
You figure that out pretty quickly looking at the majority of the Franks board, because the Franks board has X for a lot of its Saga abilities. And X is equivalent to whatever is in your battle pool. Your battle pool can only be one of each type of facing of dice, and that's it. So the most that it can ever be is 3, and that'll take a rare, uncommon, and a common. Franks really want all facings of dice and not one type of dice in particular.
Okay.
Getting one major focused type of dice on a turn can be ruining to specific builds, and you say, oh no. I remember Jeff at that same Adapticon. Jeff won the first year with Skraelings, took Merovingian Franks the same year as I did. So he was sitting next to me while I was playing Monty, one of the worst rules of my life and stuff. And I remember he looked over and he goes, "Ooh, you only need 2 helmets." And I had rolled all helmets, and I don't need all helmets. So, and you don't ever want all of one Saga dice. There's a couple boards that the game don't really care. They'll still function just fine or something like that. If you're a shooting warrior army and you just dump them all into activations, or some of these guys that have abilities to activate anything on the board. Real quickly, one of my first assessments when I look at a new Saga board, any Saga board at all, to try to get an initial impression of some of the stuff that you might supposed to be doing in it, is look at which things can be accessed with all 3 dice right away. Because you know then that every single turn of the game, you will be able to perform this function. Now, whether you're supposed to, or whether it's implied that you need to, or whichever is up in the air, but knowing there that the designers have already put this ability that they maybe imagine the Franks using every single time. Or you look at Vikings with, I'm trying to think which one of these are all dice or something like that. You look at the Goths in A&A, for example, then you see a ton of them that can function with all of them. Now, just because you can have an ability that functions with all dice does not mean that it's necessarily a poor ability or a super strong ability or anything else like that. That's the other thing. You should never look at abilities just in a vacuum. We have to be able to look at the larger picture of how it can apply to the board, then to the units, and then we step all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, and we're sitting there setting our woods down again. We're setting our woods down again. We're setting our woods down again. We practiced it all the way forward and then backwards. It's a good lesson for any Saga board, but especially this. So yeah, going through our regular activations here, we got 1, 2, 3 of the standard activations here. We have Cabellarii, I think is how it's pronounced. Latin usually pronounce every single vowel that is in there. Might be Cabellarii. Either way, Militae later on would have been pretty appropriate, or anything else. They're using kind of a different name there. Then you have your melee there, your warriors. I usually run a lot of the functions in my army is warriors. Warriors to me are the most important class in Saga. It is my small little meta's opinion usually that all warrior builds and warrior focused builds are always going to be the strongest, and a lot of other people have a similar opinion, or at least can understand that.
I kind of lean towards that generally. Everything being even, I just prefer more bodies on the board.
Absolutely, but when you think about things we're talking with the Franks and apply it to all your other stuff, you start to say, as you sit down that unit of 8 Hearthguard, you say, now what is your specific role in this fight? And it's not going to be based on something that you decided at home. It'll be depending on how the terrain looks, how your deployment looks, and finally who your opponent is, and needing to practice and condition yourselves for all of those times makes it so the board that's the headache board no longer turns into the headache board. It only becomes a headache board because we start to see all the genius, or we start to see all the opportunities that show up. But we can't, it's too much. It's an information overload. We have too much candy, and we need candy so bad.
Yeah.
And we're looking at all this stuff. So we look on there, and we realize that we want balance in everything. Looking, well, actually, hold on. Looking at the other thing to mention, too, is that while you might think that it is normal that all Saga boards have the same setup for their activations, I think, as you kind of talked about, like in your Spanish video, we see that a lot of guys change that up.
Yeah.
Franks are still standard, but it's good to remember to guys that like continental armies that the Byzantines are not standard in that. You can use, instead, it is not a common rare, it is a common uncommon. So when we talk about trying to investigate the secrets of the implications, if we pretend we are some sort of archaeologist looking to see what the great designers have left us, because that's the greatest thing about this. Even the developers, Alex and stuff like that, have said that they never really planned to see so much depth come out of a few of these things that they put together, and that's why other guys are running out, because they stepped back and said, woof, that's a lot.
Awesome, yeah.
Just the Franks, it's their brainchild that they didn't know was their brainchild, maybe.
Okay.
So,
So we have those 3 standards, activations somewhat. Then we mentioned the battle pool. So that, we kind of touched on it earlier, but replaces the standard kind of dice generating box that's usually in that position. So you said there's one, that exploitation, that has a huge downside. So exploitation. Roll 4 extra Saga dice. Until the end of the current turn, you may not use any Saga ability other than the activation abilities, and you may not engage in melee or shoot at the enemy. You might be running with just the 6, potentially.
And that can be extremely stressful a little bit, because you realize that a lot of your abilities, it looks nice on here at a glance because we only see 2 abilities that cost 2 dice to activate. A lot of times people can be scared. Sometimes you realize your board looks good. Oh, those costs aren't so bad. And then you realize you have 5 dice and you want to run two dice abilities, and you say, this is not working so well.
Yeah.
And then you realize that there's the tax of the battle pool on top of all these. So really at its maximum potential, and this isn't really how it works out in numbers anyways, but we look at anticipation.
Anticipation. Designate X units. Until the end of the current turn, if any of these units is shot or engaged in melee, it automatically gains X defense dice during step 2 or 3 of the shooting/melee.
At its highest potential, it requires 4 total dice, and 2 of them must be rares for it to be at its best ability. And sometimes just managing that economy of your board is the biggest part about that. Managing battle pool, and then importantly, now let's talk about the combat pool there too, because the combat pool can be a trick.
So that looks really interesting. Combat pool. This is a melee shooting or shooting reaction ability. Gain a number of attack or defense dice equal to the number of dice in your battle pool. Then, if you have more than 1 Saga die in your battle pool, remove 1 of those Saga dice.
As we see, is melee shooting reaction. Of course, we always got to look at that real quick, and it can be attack and defense dice. Of course, the Franks have all of the abilities. They're the hyper-adaptable boys. And so we look, and we realize, though, that when we discard 1, we get the number of attack dice or defense dice, but not a mixture of both, equal to what our battle pool is. Unfortunately, though, it reduces our battle pool by 1. And so suddenly, the use of it reduces the overall effectiveness of our entire army if we do it in the wrong order. This is the importance of talking about tactics over strategy. Having that drilled down to understand, like, okay, boom, I know what I'm doing with my combat pool. To this day, I'll still mess up, especially switching over to the old foot salient Franks there. A complete departure. You switch over, and I'm playing Franks, a board that I feel like I know really well, and then it's still just a completely different ball game. Suddenly, there's so much potential, but I think there's immense potential for so much anyway. With your combat pool, though, you'll have to decide a lot of times that that's going to be in your opponent's turn, and a lot of times in great fashion, it's used with planification.
Planification. This is an activation reaction ability that uses an uncommon Saga tie. After an enemy unit has been activated for a movement, but before the movement is resolved, activate one of your units. The number of models in this unit may not exceed 3 times the number of Saga dice in your battle pool.
At the end of something, you know that you're not going to be activating more times in your opponent's turn than the one time that you might be able to activate with planification. So a lot of times you say, I might as well go ahead and toss my die in there. But sometimes you may say that my opponent's getting ready to slam against me and I still need to benefit from the extra defense dice by anticipation, and I want it to be at its highest. So suddenly we're reducing the effectiveness of our other good abilities. We were sitting on protection the whole time.
Protection. This is a melee or shooting reaction ability that uses an uncommon Saga die. Before determining the number of defense dice to be rolled, reduce the number of hits suffered by our unit by X. Which
lets us discard 3 hits that have come to us.
Ooh, like the sound of that.
Unsaved. Not unsaved hits, though. So it can be a little disappointing sometimes when you get hit by a wave of stuff, because sometimes, especially combined with anticipation, which, if we talk about that in a sec, is probably one of the strongest abilities on the board. You say, all right, I could potentially cancel a ton of stuff, and then protection will slough it off. No, it's not like Warlord's Resilience or something like that. You instead have to take just right off the top your overall hits. So it's okay. It's situational. It's definitely for later turns in the game or earlier turns. Honestly, it's really up in the air. Again, the Franks should not think about one specific turn being their turn. Rather, the entire game is their entire turn, and they're working small pieces the entire way.
Okay.
We are slowly lowering it down.
Yeah, so we'll keep that in mind. Is that all we have to say about the combat pool?
Yep, we'll talk about some other instances when I think it might come into place, especially with my own build and other things like that.
Excellent.
When I played this board, it was beautiful because now we see the battle pool and we only have those 6 dice, and we talked about how heinous it can be to have the tax. And we'll talk about exploitation maybe as the next ability to tie this all together. But when you got the priest and suddenly you can have 2 dice every turn, you're always dice. One of the great, beautiful things that a lot of Saga players, once they realize it's a thing for their board, love to do is if somehow you are blessed with dice, you burn some of your order's abilities and get more unused dice and create more in your pool, and effectively you've used 10, 12 Saga dice in your turn now. And the Franks can do that right away. You see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of their abilities is either an orders or an orders reaction. Obviously, we can't use orders reactions to get the Saga dice benefits, but it's just interesting to point that out right away.
Wow. Yeah.
We look at the Bretons, for example, and you see that 6 of their abilities are shooting. Now, you know what you're going to do with it.
Yes.
It's very clear. But sometimes this is why people become disheartened when they look at the English factions and stuff like that, because they don't see the clear goal of aggressive winning each turn. They are not as patient for the dominance of sustained good choices or whichever, picking or defending yourself. The attrition is not very fun. Guys can come siege your castle and they can all starve outside, and you can moon them and stuff every once in a while. It's fun for a little bit. But at a certain point, you say, like, that wasn't really as mighty. I'm not really going to go brag to the guy at the bar. I mean, he didn't do, we just starved these guys to death. That wasn't very fun. But in a way, that's what we are doing with a lot of these boards, and the poor English boards, too. A lot of people really value the English boards really low on the overall competition scale of things. They think the Anglo-Danes are these really lacking guys, but they're not paying attention to the balanced aspects of the Saga game and need to rely on their individual skills with tactics and picking it out, the right opportunity. Looking now at the abilities, we have, and I'm just going to rattle them off real quick and then kind of go through them. We got Adaptation, which is every sort of dang thing other than an orders pretty much, and a shooting ability. We got Preparation, Interdiction, Retribution, Protection, Oppression, Exploitation, Anticipation, Planification, and Domination. All shuns. It's fun to say it all at once, and that's the only reason I wanted to say them all at once, is because it gets very clear that you're saying shun. I think that planification is maybe a made-up word. I'm not really not so sure.
I do not know what that would mean.
So we're looking it up a little bit. We know that it means plan in this case. To glance at the principal strong abilities at this real quickly, not always when we see a rare on a Saga board doesn't mean that the ability is super good. It might mean that it's super situational because of their army list, That's why it costs that much. We look at the Normans as a good example for this. We say, woo, you got a lot of rares on that board. But you know what? Not everybody can jump 36 shots 24 inches downrange with just a handful of common and uncommon dice. And so they say, oh, okay, well, we're gonna balance this a little bit. People sometimes get upset looking at something like the Normans because they think the Norman Knights, we're crushing guys with the Norman Knights. If we look at all of Saga as just black, white, and gray pieces, and look at it as a pure game first, and trust me, I'm absolutely into the aesthetic. I want it to all be there just as much as everything else. But we can't have our hearts broken over some of the times when our Norman Knights somehow aren't charging as good as the Vikings. We look at the 4 archetypes, the very first boards.
Yeah.
And it's not so much. We see which the aggressive board is out of the 4 boards at the beginning.
Absolutely.
We shouldn't be surprised then that they made a second aggressive board inside of the same thing. No, that doesn't make sense. We have another type of board. We have 4 principal types, disciplines kind of in Saga, started by those first 4 boards that change a couple times, but in a way we have to get proficient with all of them to be good at the game. And sometimes people come to Franks or continental armies across the board are having their heart broken because the charge of the great Carolingian Knights or the charge of the Norman Knights cost them 3 rares for me to get this off, and I only killed, you're gonna kill me the next round.
Yeah.
But if we look at these black, white, and gray game pieces, we say, well, those guys can really, nothing can shoot 24 inches in the game still to this day.
Yeah.
That's the most diabolical things. If you haven't played Normans in a while, you sit down and someone pulls that on you and you go, oh boy, I forgot about I did not plan on this. Like, this is completely, I looked at all your levy and thought you were going to lose. But looking around then at these guys, I think that the price is right for a lot of these abilities on here. You can't kind of judge their initial strength straight up by their raw ability on here. For the first one, we got Adaptation up top.
Adaptation. This is an orders reaction, shooting reaction, or melee reaction ability that uses an uncommon or a rare Saga die. Roll 1 Saga die if you used an uncommon die for this ability. Otherwise, you roll 2 Saga dice if it was a rare. After rolling the die or dice, you can place it on your battle board. In addition, after rolling the extra Saga dice, you can move any number of Saga dice on your battle board to any different Saga ability.
And that is an ability that as a Franks player you either use all the time or you don't use it at all. It just never factors into your plans, or it's everything for your plans. I'm more in the camp that I love putting something in adaptation, and I love putting it there all the time. Okay. If you roll a natural 6 and you haven't done exploitation, and I think we need to go back here in a second. I keep forgetting to go to exploitation, but if we roll a natural 6, we see that we can discard it on there for any of these different diverse stages: orders reaction, shooting reaction, melee reaction, and suddenly we can roll 2 dice or 1 die if it was just a regular uncommon, and put it on the board. But that's not the super cool part. Suddenly we can now rearrange every die that's on the board. We get to just do whatever we want with them. We can change whatever way we want, and they give us 3 distinct separate times for us to be able to do it. In one way, we can do it in our own turn. If suddenly we got the wrong amount of dice, but we see a small melee engagement we think we can win or might give us something in position, we might decide to charge with adaptation, hit it right away, hit our melee reaction right away because it'll hit at step 0. Boom, we've got our 6. We can rearrange everything on the board very quickly. Suddenly we can stop in the middle of this poor fella's melee step 0 and say, hold on, I'm actually redoing my entire turn for a second. That's all this really was. And sometimes one of the overlooked things is that we can also be putting those dice straight back into activations. We might find that something at the end of the turn did not go the way that we wanted to. Perhaps we had a couple small shooting activations and a we obey from the warlord or something, and our goal was maybe to take 3 or 4 off the top of one unit with all of them focused, or maybe we wanted to get good position with them, so just something didn't happen right. And so instead, we force ourselves into an adaptation, usually with a 6 on there, and I'll get back to why we should almost always have 6s with the Franks on here in a second. But suddenly we put ourselves into the fight, not because we want to win the fight. These are always good things for the warlord because he can usually soak stuff up. In my own case, I didn't play this way. I took my priest, and I wasn't focused on these in my turn major activations and stuff like that. This is an alternate and popular style to play. Suddenly we have a couple more dice, and we toss them over and just Hearthguard, Hearthguard, Hearthguard. Say we're playing Merovingians or something like that, and it didn't quite go how we wanted. We have maybe one fatigue now on our Merovingians that moved up, activated and shot again, fatigue-free, thanks to our great ability oppression down there. Shot one more time and went ahead and put some extra fatigue on there. You say, that's it, that's all I was planning to sacrifice. The Saxons now charge. It did not go how we wanted it to with the Saxons, and so we say, damn it, it was vital and statistically correct, as all Franks and Continental players will complain and cry like babies, myself included, and to say, hey, this is impossible, unlikely, we'll say, that it could ever get this way. But it happens, and boy, it'll happen no matter what you do. Yeah. It'll kick right in the stomach, and so sometimes then you might say, I have one surviving Saxon from this, and I was planning to have only 2 surviving Saxons, but your principal unit was removed or something like that. And we say, crap, now I need to charge again with my Saxons, throwing caution to the wind. Maybe this is turn 5 or 6, and we get into these sort of gambit situations. And we say, I know that I'm going to lose that Saxon unit there, but in the course of it, I hit my adaptation with a 6. I was usually holding on to my adaptation with the 6 for my opponent's round, which is one of my favorite things to be doing, because that's the normal time that we like to do it, and I'll get to that too. But suddenly we move all this stuff. We say, you know what, there is no next turn. And we switch everything over. We load everything up to activation. We put things on the combat pool. And we decide that we're going to over-activate that Merovingian Hearthguard unit to death until they either burn fatigue or don't burn it so that it dies out. That's another great thing that you'll learn in Saga, or Raw Saga, is when do I feel like I should be burning it or not burning it for this shooting unit that we know is going to get a fatigue at the end of it? When is the time when I feel my instinct is telling me to let that fatigue pile up and get them exhausted? When is the time that it's not? If you're watching, if you're the other player or something, and you see the Frank player, Merovingian, slide all of his dice over there, probably let him exhaust himself. Because the Franks have a fantastic way to get rid of fatigue down here called Retribution.
Retribution? This is an orders or orders reaction ability that uses an uncommon Saga die. Discard up to X fatigues from any units in play.
But we see that it's an orders or an orders reaction. So a lot of Franks players will sometimes do something that requires fatigue in their turn, sometimes triple activating a unit or something like that. And then in the start of their turn, before anything happens, go ahead and move that off. So to go ahead and make sure that they're not up to get ruined by the next unit. How many times have a lot of us in Saga had our principal combat hurt those guys' units, charge up for the right target? We wanted it since the beginning of the game. We do well on it, but then we sit and admire the fact that we have 2 fatigues. We're a 7-man now Hearthguard unit, and there's just 2 5-man warrior units right next to us, and we say, like, oh boy, I really don't want even just 5 attacks hitting me on armor 4 on my principal strong biggest unit and stuff. And so that's a big deal. Retribution is a great way out of that, but it's not going to something that will help you in your main turn itself. Now back to adaptation, though. The main way that I use it is that with a 6 or just an uncommon, I always like to have the uncommon one on there anyway. You're going to roll it and put it right back on your board, and you have a decent chance of it being an uncommon or rare again and placing it somewhere. But if it is coming up as a single common, it's usually unfortunate to me in your opponent's turn and other stuff like that. A lot of the best stuff you want on this board are uncommons or a combination of something on here. And so that can be unfortunate. But you have 2 times, as we can remind ourselves, to play orders reactions. And they've kind of fogged the lines of this a little bit, and now some have said that you could allow interruption or whatever. But classically, we have after the opponent has rolled their Saga dice, but before they have put them on their board, or now at the end of your opponent's orders phase, after all their dice on their board and they're getting ready to go into their activations phase, you say, I'm going to do it now.
Yeah, most common time.
I usually do that unless I find that I don't really have a good play that turn, or I'm worried about something specific, and then I will do it after they've rolled their dice, but before they've put them on the board, so that I can use Interdiction.
Interdiction. This is an orders reaction ability that uses a common die. This ability may only be used before any Saga die has been placed on the enemy battle board. Designate a non-activation Saga ability on the enemy battle board without any Saga dice in its ability box. At the end of the enemy's order phase, if any Saga die has been placed on this box, place X fatigues on enemy units.
And Interdiction is an ability that is so-so. In the right opportunity, it can really put leverage on your opponent, because what it does is it lets you pick an ability on their board that can't be an activation ability. You can nominate it, and in their phase, if they put any Saga dice onto it, they have to take X fatigues, and you get to put those fatigues on their army. And so that's a big intimidating factor, because we need to understand, too, in the case of fighting someone like the Spanish or something else like that, that an activation reaction is not an activation. We have to remember that the timing and the names of the abilities that are at the top are the names of the timing of when these things happen, rather than a specific trait about the ability itself. It's timing rather than a taxonomy for that sort of thing. So in the case, then, I only bring it up because Spanish or some of these others with vicious activation reactions that they want to put on there in their turn. And let me tell you, it's very fun to play Franks against another reactive army. So then you have this kind of mass where you don't really know whose turn it is, because everyone's playing back and forth with each other.
That's funny.
On that note, I need to bring up, and we'll get to it down the line of planification here. But anyhow, so Interdiction is something that has to be done before they put their dice on the board. So a lot of times, if I know that I don't have too many options, and I know that I'm not looking for something specific, maybe my dice is already loaded on my board and I just want to do it, I'll pop it before they do anything, because I want to be able to hit Interdiction at the last minute and put it on there. Typically going into the round, I don't use Interdiction so much. It really, really depends on the opponent that you're getting at. Some guys, you have that one ability that you really don't want them to use, and it's pretty helpful then to go after
Ruler, I'm thinking of, with Vikings.
That's a huge one. Vikings can really get messed up by the Franks, because suddenly dealing with fatigue and stuff like that is usually kind of one of their ball games. But if you put it on one of their abilities that removes their fatigue, and they have to put it on there, then a lot of times you're canceling the ability out no matter what they want. And pretty much every Viking player loves the double activate and going in with Frigg and getting the nice attack or something like that. Ruining that is great. We can all think of some abilities that are huge. A lot of orders abilities, like How Brave Are You? Or Stout Hearts with the Anglo-Saxons or something like that. These ones that are strong modifiers. Then you really start to get into some strong stuff on there. But most of the time I find that I've got other minds when I'm using the board. But that's just a good example of so many things that you could be playing just around using that each time. Going back in between these real quick is Preparation.
Preparation. This is an orders ability that uses 2 uncommon dice. Take an unused Saga die and put it with your Saga dice you rolled at the start of the orders phase with the rare symbol face up.
And Preparation is one of the reasons why I say a Franks player most of the time should have an access to a 6, or getting a 6 shouldn't be too hard. We see 3 main abilities on here, really 4 if we count the battle pool needing 1 to be complete. 4 abilities on here that really want a 6 and are really good abilities to use 6s on. And depending on your play style, you might decide to skip one completely or focus only on the other. So with Preparation, a lot of times we can really guarantee ourselves a 6. Or if we're doing really well, we got the Religious Advisor. Back in the day, he was giving you 2 dice. Even now, taking the Religious Advisor is not a bad decision, because again, getting Saga dice is pretty hard for the board. So getting that, even just 1 Saga dice, which is a lot less than the 2 that he used to get, and they can already get rid of fatigue pretty easy on their own army. It could be pretty nice sometimes.
Yeah, and there's those key turns. You're not going to be doing this from turn 1 and onwards. He's going to be hanging back there. Then turn 3, 4, or 5, when the shit's really hitting the fan, then you're going to have boom. This is the turn where I'm going to get to do everything I want to do for sure, because I've got these 2 extra dice and it's going to happen.
In a small way, though, sometimes that's one of the things with the Franks that you'll get disappointed with, except maybe at the very end of situation. And you say, I got on my dice. It looks beautiful, baby. The board's loaded. And then it's the start of your next turn, and you realize, like, I have a beautiful board, but it didn't do anything this turn. Like, I don't really felt like it did anything. And so the people that need that direct gratification should probably stay away from the Franks board, or focus on one of the types of the board that uses multi-activates.
As we're approaching the half-hour mark, we're going to have to call this one. Pop back next week for the conclusion of our Franks Battleboard and Tactics discussion. In the meantime, if you have any questions about what you've heard so far, please post a comment below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week.
Saga!